Welcome back to the Halls of History. I am your host, Scott Hall. The NFL season is getting closer. Championship-winning coach Buddy Parker was selected by the Hall of Fame committee as the finalist for the coach/contributor category, and tomorrow the senior committee will be whittling down their list to get to the finalist, or more than one, like the class of 2023, for next year's induction class. To review, my trivia question from the end of my last show on the 7 sets of teammates to rush for 1,000 yards in the same season, I asked who was the first player to record 4 seasons with at least 90 receptions. The answer? Sterling Sharpe. One of those players on the list from the senior committee who is hoping to see his name move to the finalist list tomorrow. Sharpe is definitely a forgotten great one, and one that I feel you cannot talk about the rise of the passing game from the 1980s to the 90s without mentioning him. Sharpe was a monster, and even though I was a 49ers fan, and then the Chiefs as well when Joe Montana went there, during this time, I couldn't wait to see Sharpe's highlights on NFL primetime. Growing up in Northern Virginia, I didn't get to see too many Packers games, and they weren't getting a lot of primetime games either. The first time I knew who Sharpe was when I got this box of 1990 Topps, and inside was his Topps All-Pro card. I remember looking at his numbers and just being wowed, and then really beginning to pay attention to his highlights. Sharpe was a first-round draft pick of the Green Bay Packers, 7th overall in 1988, a draft that already includes 5 others who are in camp: running back Thurman Thomas, receivers Tim Brown and Michael Irvin, guard Randall McDaniel, and center Dermontti Dawson. Now, before anybody wants to jump out and say, hey, Sharpe had a short career, I understand that. Sharpe played just 7 seasons in the NFL, but it was an incredible run. He was named to the Pro Bowl 5 of those years, was a first-team All-Pro 3 times, and finished in the top 10 in MVP and Offensive Player of the Year voting twice. Plus, he was the first to not only tally 4 seasons of 90 or more catches, but also the first to have over 100 grabs twice. Sharpe led the Packers in receiving each year, even in his down years. He led the league in catches 3 times, yards once, touchdown grabs twice, and won the receiving Triple Crown in 1992. His complete career numbers: 595 catches for 8,134 yards and 65 scores. Again, especially with the receiving numbers that we are used to now, you might be thinking, what is so special about those stats? Plenty of others have had more than that and are definitely not gold jacket worthy. Yes, but there is more to it. Sterling Sharpe averaged 85 catches for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns per season as pretty much the only offensive weapon that the Packers had during those years, and he got it started right from the beginning. In 1988, there were only 3 games that Sharpe did not record a catch. He did catch a pass in his final 103 regular season games, though. The 6-foot, 207-pound receiver finished the year with 55 catches for 791 yards and 1 score. But in 1989, Sharpe exploded to the forefront with 90 grabs for 1,423 yards and 12 TDs. He led the NFL in catches, finished second in yards and touchdowns to Jerry Rice. Sharpe was named to his first Pro Bowl and an All-Pro nod. In 1990, the numbers dipped a little to 67 receptions for 1,105 yards and 6 scores. The Packers that year struggled at quarterback. Don Majkowski, the Magic Man, was not able to replicate his '89 season when he threw for over 4,300 yards. Majkowski dealt with injuries, starting just 8 games. Backups Anthony Dilweg and Blair Kyle combined to go 3-5, and the offense fluttered that year, ranking 23rd out of 28 teams in points scored. 1991 was another struggle under center for the Pack. Majkowski was still not quite healthy, starting 8 games again and completing only 50.9% of his passes. Mike Tomczak started 7 games, completing almost 54%, and Blair Kyle had the other start. Green Bay went 4-12 with the 22nd ranked scoring offense. Sharpe still came through with a very solid campaign at 69 catches for 961 yards and 4 scores. 1992 brought on a bit of some change and start of stability at quarterback. Brett Favre stepped in for an ailing Majkowski, and Sharpe thrived. He broke Art Monk's 8-year-old record of 106 catches, hauling in 108 with 1,461 yards and 13 touchdowns to win the receiving Triple Crown. Green Bay's offense overall was still not the best, ranking 17th in scoring, but Sharpe accounted for over 31% of the team's completions, over 41% of the passing yards, and had almost half of the Packers' total offensive touchdowns. Green Bay only scored 27 times on offense, and Sharpe tallied 13 of those. 1993 was another record-breaking year for Sharpe. He surpassed his own mark from the year before, this time with 112 catches for 1,274 yards and 11 TDs. He was now the first with not only 2 seasons of 100 catches, but back-to-back as well. With Favre settling in and leaning on Sterling Sharpe, the Packers improved to 6th in scoring offense. Sharpe grabbed nearly 35% of the pass completions and just over 38% of the yardage. Plus, for the first time in his career, the Packers reached the playoffs. In the wild card against the Lions, Sharpe had 5 catches for 101 yards, 3 touchdowns, including the game winner, a 40-yard bomb from Favre. What a catch. It was the Packers' first playoff win since the 1982 season, and even though Green Bay lost to the eventual Super Bowl champions Dallas in the divisional round, Sharpe still managed 6 catches for 128 yards and a score in the loss. In 1994, Favre and Sharpe were at it again. This time his catches and yards were down a little, but not his touchdowns. Sharpe grabbed 94 passes to become the first player in league history with 4 seasons of 90 or more, total 1,119 yards, and a career-best 18 touchdowns. Still one of the top receiving performances. Through the first 6 weeks, Sharpe had 5 TD catches and went through a 4-week dry spell before going off over the final 6 games. 2 at Buffalo, 4 at Dallas, 1 at Detroit, 2 versus Chicago, 1 against Atlanta, and 3 to finish the year at Tampa. However, these were his last games. Sharpe suffered a neck injury against the Falcons in Week 16. He did come back and play at Tampa Bay with that incredible game, but had another neck stinger in that contest. The overall neck injuries forced one of the greatest offensive weapons in the NFL to retire at just 29 years old. Now, after looking at his career, let's take a deeper look and do some comparisons. For these comparisons, I went with just his contemporaries who already have gold jackets. Jerry Rice, Cris Carter, Tim Brown, Michael Irvin, Andre Reed, and even threw in his brother Shannon just for grins. Sharpe's career averages, again, were 85 catches, 1,162 yards, and 9.29 touchdowns per season. Well, here's how those numbers stack up with those Hall of Famers I mentioned. Jerry Rice, 77 receptions, 1,145 yards, and 9.85 TDs. Cris Carter, 68 catches, 869 yards, 8.13 touchdowns. Tim Brown, 64 grabs, 878 yards, 5.88 scores. Michael Irvin, 63 receptions, 992 yards, 5.42 TDs. Andre Reed, 59 grabs, 825 yards, 5.44 scores. And Shannon Sharpe, 58 catches, 719 yards, 4.43 touchdowns. So that is first in catches and yards, and second only to the great Jerry Rice for touchdowns per year. Oh, that is not where the comparing stops. Sharpe averaged 5.3 catches per game. Rice had 5.1, Carter and Irvin 4.7, Brown 4.3, Reed 4.1, and Shannon 4.0. Sterling Sharpe leads the way. The Packers' great averaged 72.6 yards per game. Rice averaged 75.6, and Irvin had 74.9. But then Carter at 59.4, Brown 58.6, Reed 56.4, and Shannon at 49.3. Sterling Sharpe ranks 3rd in this one. Here's another that might blow you away. Sharpe never played with another 1,000-yard receiver or even a 1,000-yard rusher in his 7 seasons. All of the others did. Jerry Rice played alongside John Taylor, Roger Craig, Ricky Watters, Garrison Hurst, Charlie Garner, Terrell Owens, and even played with Tim Brown and Tyrone Wheatley in Oakland. Plus, Sean Alexander and Darrell Jackson during his short 11-game stint with Seattle Seahawks in 2004. Cris Carter got to share the field with Jake Reed, Randy Moss, Terry Allen, and Robert Smith. Even Ricky Williams in 2002 with Miami. Now, Carter did just play 5 games that year. Michael Irvin? Well, of course, who doesn't know about him being a part of the triplets with Emmitt Smith, the NFL's all-time rushing leader. Alvin Harper never had 1,000 yards in a season, but he was definitely a threat for the Cowboys, averaging 20 yards per catch in his 5 seasons there. Rocket Ishmael did go over 1,000 receiving in 1999, but that was also the year that Irvin played just 4 games, injuring his neck, and retired. Tim Brown played alongside Harvey Williams, Napoleon Kaufman, Tyrone Wheatley, Not to mention Bo Jackson and Marcus Allen early on as far as eating up some yards and touchdowns. And then, of course, with Jerry Rice later. Andre Reed had Thurman Thomas with him for a large chunk of his career, as well as James Lofton for a few years, and then Antoine Smith and Eric Moulds at the end. Plus, there was Stephen Davis during Reed's final season in Washington. And Shannon Sharpe played with Bobby Humphrey, Gaston Green, Anthony Miller, Rod Smith, Ed McCaffrey, Terrell Davis, Olandis Gary, and then Clinton Portis in his second go-round in Denver. Plus, Jamal Lewis and Qadri Ismail in Baltimore. But Sharpe, nope. And as far as getting help from a rushing attack, here are Sharpe's contemporaries first before I go into his numbers. Jerry Rice played in an offense that featured a top 10 ground game 13 times, including that stop off in Seattle, in the top 3 6 times, and led the NFL 3 times in 1987, 98, and 99. Cris Carter had 2 top 10 ground games in Philly and 4 in Minnesota. His quick 5-game venture with Miami in 2002, the Dolphins ranked second. Tim Brown had 6 top 10 ground attacks, with 3 in the top 3, and led the league once in 2000. Michael Irvin and the Cowboys sported a top 10 ground game 6 times, with 2 in the top 3. Andre Reed shared the field with 11 top 10 ground attacks, including every year from 1988 to 96, and twice leading the league, coming in 1991 and 92. Shannon Sharpe 8 times played with a top 10 ground game, and 3 in the top 3, and a league leader once in 1996. For Sterling Sharpe, in 1988, Green Bay ranked 26th. 1989, they were 20th. 1990, dropped back to 26th and just 5 rushing touchdowns. 1991, there was a small improvement to 22nd. In 1992, Green Bay was up to 21st, but back to 22nd in 1993. And finally, 1994 was the best rushing attack that Sharpe had ever played with, 19th. Now, over those last 2 seasons, the top 2 rushers for Green Bay did combine for over 1,100 yards, but both averaged less than 4 yards per carry. Here are some of the other offensive players that Sharpe played with during his career, and no offense to those athletes, but defensive coordinators were not exactly worried about them, and possibly only die-hard Packer fans may remember their names. Receivers Perry Kemp, Jeff Query, Clarence Weathers, Mark Clayton at the end of his career had just 331 yards in 1993, and Robert Brooks. Running backs Brent Fullwood, Keith Woodside, Michael Haddix, Darrell Thompson, Vince Workman, Reggie Cobb, and Edgar Bennett. Tight ends Ed West, Jackie Harris, and Mark Chmura. Now you might say, well, hey, Robert Brooks was a 1,000-yard receiver, and Edgar Bennett hit the milestone, and Mark Chmura was also a good threat. Yes to all 3. However, that didn't happen until after Sharpe retired. Brooks and Bennett both reached 1,000 yards in 1995, and Chmura was a Pro Bowler that year. In fact, 1995 was the first time in franchise history that Green Bay had a 1,000-yard rusher and receiver in the same season. Kind of stunning. Here's another tidbit. During Sharpe's 112 career games, the Packers had a total of 37 100-yard receiving games. 29 were from Sharpe. Only 8 combined by 7 different players. Walter Stanley was the only repeater out of that group, with 2, both coming in 1988. And just once did another player have a 100-yard game the same time as Sharpe. Anthony Morgan had 103 on December 4th, 1994 against the Lions. Meanwhile, individual 100-yard rushing games over the same span, just 11 by 5 players. Of those 11, 6 did come in games when Sharpe also had 100 yards receiving. Sterling Sharpe also played with very few Pro Bowlers. In 1989, Don Majkowski, Brent Fullwood, and Tim Harris on defense were named. In 1992, Brett Favre went to his first of many, and free safety Chuck Cecil. 1993, Favre goes back, along with Reggie White, Leroy Butler, and kicker Chris Jackie didn't go to the Pro Bowl, but he was named first-team All-Pro. Go figure that one. And then in 1994, it was White again, along with Bryce Popp. 9 total other Pro Bowl nods during Sharpe's 7 seasons and his 5 Pro Bowl trips. When you break all of this down, you see a great player who was kind of alone during his career. Sharpe put up amazing numbers with not much help. And I am in no way trying to take away anything from the other Hall of Famers from this time period, but they all had someone that could help take some of the load off. I mean, other players that if you tried to eliminate, Rice, Carter, Brown, Irvin, Reed, and Shannon Sharpe, that you could still get burned. Sterling was pretty much alone and unfortunately suffered that career-ending injury just when Green Bay was getting him some help. getting really good. I mean, could you imagine Sharpe getting to play with Robert Brooks, Antonio Freeman, Edgar Bennett, and Dorsey Levens, with MVP Brett Favre running around, plus the defense that was beginning to form as well with Reggie White, Sean Jones, and Leroy Butler, and coaching stability in Mike Holmgren. I firmly believe that if Sharpe had not been injured, he would have finished with well over 1,000 receptions and probably ending up around at least 120 touchdowns. Hey, in just 3 years with Favre, he had 314 catches and scored 41 times. I was in the crowd in Canton, Ohio when Shannon Sharpe was inducted, and I remember him almost pleading with the Hall of Fame voters to just take a look at his brother's numbers. One part that should tell you all you need to know if Sterling Sharpe is gold jacket worthy. During his speech, Shannon said, quote, "I am the only player of 267 men that's walked through this building to my left that can honestly say this. I'm the only pro football player that's in the Hall of Fame and the second best player in my own family. If fate had dealt you a different hand, there is no question in my mind, we would have been the first brothers to be elected to the Hall of Fame." End quote. Plenty of cheers and tears from that moment. Now, if all of those numbers and what Shannon said in his speech wasn't enough for you, I do have one last argument, and I'm going all time here, not just the contemporaries. Doesn't matter the era of the game. And a big thank you to stathead.com for being able to easily find numbers like this. If you look up players to go through their first 7 seasons of their careers and put in how many have had at least 500 catches with over 8,000 yards and score at least 65 touchdowns, you get just 6 names. I look at those greats listed. Marvin Harrison, Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson, and Jerry Rice already are in the Hall. Larry Fitzgerald won't be eligible until 2025, and you can pretty much guarantee he will be in. But yet, third on that list is Sterling Sharpe. Makes you think. Well, let me know what you think in the comments below. Hopefully his name will be mentioned tomorrow as a finalist. Now, if he is named, that is still not a guarantee that he will be inducted in the coming class. The Hall of Fame voters still meet about everyone in January. For my next episode, I'm going to take a look at those who have already been named as finalists, including Coach Buddy Parker. If Sterling Sharpe is one of them, don't worry, I won't go back through everything I've just done here today. As always, if you like the content here on the Halls of History, be sure to click that subscribe button and hit the notification as well to always know what is next. Don't forget, you can catch up at any time with previous videos right here on the Halls of History.